Very good. Okay. Great. I see people showing up. We're going to start in about one moment here. Martin, welcome to the webinar about PPP Forgiveness. Charlie. Chris Todd, trying to see if all the people we work with out there. Yeah, welcome to the event. Okay, Donald, welcome. Doug. Yeah, people are coming in. Fantastic. Yeah, Cindy. We'll get started in just a moment here. I'll give one more minute for folks to log in. Tony, welcome to the event. Steve. The topic is PPP Forgiveness. Suzanne, welcome to the webinar. Come on in. We've got seats on the front row.
Virtual seats.
VIP reserved for you. Wayne, welcome to the webinar. All right, Stuart, fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna screen share. We're gonna get things going here. Okay, we're right at time. Welcome to the webinar, everyone. And hey, since this is a big group, we definitely can't open up the mic, so attendees are on mute. But by all means, please submit your questions in the chat box. Right, I'm going to be monitoring the chat box. I'm going to throw questions out for John and Jose, and then certainly afterwards, if we didn't get to your question, do email us, because we'll, it's important that the community out there is on top of PPP, and more coming up pretty quick here is PPP Forgiveness for many of us. So I want to read our legal disclaimer. This thing is moving fast. I mean, even the conversation about the use period being extended or not extended, taxes, all kinds of questions going on out there. So what we're doing here is we're using the information that's available now, right? Based on interpretations and how it applies to your business. So I'm going to read our legal notice. This is a moving target that we're all working to clarify and use the best guidance available to get the outcome that you need for your business. So our discussion may include predictions, estimates, or other information that might be considered forward-looking. While these forward-looking statements represent our current judgment and knowledge on what the future may hold, they are subject to risk and uncertainties that could cause actual results to differ materially. You are cautioned not to place undue reliance on these forward-looking statements, which reflect our opinions and knowledge only as of the date of this presentation. Throughout today's discussion, we will attempt to represent as transparently as possible what we know as of this date. Please keep in mind that we are not obliging ourselves to revise or publicly release the results of any revision to these statements in light of new information or future events, including clarifications to the SBA rules on this. So that said, let's jump right into it. And my name is Kirk. I'm the CEO of FORESIGHT CFO, and we have growth CFOs across 3 different continents who are helping CEOs clarify growth options going forward, having confidence in the right choice by using the numbers, and then that implementation to achieve the financial impacts that each of us needs to survive and thrive through the epidemic. So John and then Jose, why don't you two introduce yourselves and we'll jump into the content of today's webinar.
All right. So my name is John Redmond. I'm a partner here at FORESIGHT CFO, and I've been working 5 years with Kirk on fractional CFO work, and before that with economic development and long-term strategies for growth for companies. So we have a pretty good foundation here on strategic development for small companies, and happy to be here today. Jose?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks, John. First and foremost, thanks for taking the time to hop on board and talk with us, or talk through this with us this morning. My name's Jose Villarino. I am, my specialty here is really partnering with CEOs. They're trying to get their company to that next liquidity event. So I'm kind of an old-fashioned cash flow guy, and I work a lot about how do we increase valuations around by increasing cash flow and getting smarter about that. And then more recently, it's really been about working with our partners, our networks, and trying to get people through this, for lack of a better phrase, bumpy time. A lot of companies are having to repivot, think about their business, think about their entire cost structure, and how we're kind of going to get through this in the next 90 days. And to a certain extent, what we're really spending a lot of time now is thinking about what's going to happen in the next 90 days. That next 3-month period after we get through this, let's say this PPP timeframe. So with that, John's going to have some opening remarks. Then I'm going to spend some time with you, kind of talking through what I know so far and and hopefully try to clear up a little bit of the confusion. But I'll tell you right up front, we're still going to be a little bit confused when this is all done.
That's fair enough, Jose. We've been that way the whole time. I want to start out looking at not just the PPP loan, but we want to talk about from a foresight point of view. And we're always concerned not just that you get some money, but that when the company gets the money, it's used well. And used well is not just correctly accounted for, but that it impacts your company in a way that really leads to growth, and in this case, sometimes survival. So in any crisis, so I'm going to give you a little background and a little framework here that we think you should be thinking about how to use the PPP and give context to your decisions. Number one, when there's a big event, you have to assess the impact, not just on you and your checkbook, but also on your customers and your vendors. They're the ones, their health and survival, something like this is going to be more important for you down the road than whether you currently have money, although that's significant. So look at I would rank your customers from most important to less important, and also from most viable to least viable. If your customers run out of money, then you're gonna be one of the things they think about dropping. So get a good look at that, be realistic. Secondly, look at your vendors. If you can sell things but they can't deliver them to you, then that really has a huge impact on your business and your viability. So take that kind of good look at the landscape. The other thing we have to think about here is long and short-term impacts of this COVID shutdown. So I have one company, one of our clients is a restaurant supply company, and they give fancy frozen desserts to restaurants and corporate cafeterias and hotels. And their business dropped 90% in March in one day. Governor made an announcement, bam, they were out of business. So I think those kind of big, and they think their calculation is that this business is not coming back for at least a year to get back to the levels they were at. People won't be in hotels and restaurants for at least a year and maybe longer. So they've shifted their whole company to a whole new. They're starting to deliver restaurant quality food deliveries to homes at a premium. So they're shifting their whole company. About half their business they think is going to shift to home delivery. Those are the kind of things you need to think about at a time like this. A couple other points. Make sure that you have good numbers, and the numbers give you a P&L for each of your discrete business parts. If you have locations, each location should give you a profit and loss for that location. because you may have to cut locations. Your product lines or divisions in your company should each have separate set of numbers determining, you might have to do some splits, like half person here, half time here, and kind of divide the numbers out so you can tell which part of your business is making you money and which one isn't. The third thing you should do, run good, better, best scenarios. Or in this case, it's optimistic, pessimistic, and likely. So run at least 3 scenarios for every situation. If our revenue drops 8 to 20%, if our revenue drops 40%, if our revenue drops 60%, right? What should we do? And also, how long will it take to come back? It takes 1 year to come back. It takes 2 years to come back. It might take 3 years to come back to our previous level. What would we do then? What will happen to our expenses? What will happen to our run rate? The other best practice, make sure you conserve cash. Many more businesses go out of business because they can't make payroll than because they don't have a good business. So the PPP is a big part of that. Make sure you spend it wisely. If you don't need the people, I say keep the money and take the loan. This is designed primarily as a way to support employees, and secondarily as a way to support businesses with low interest loan, a 1% loan. So if you need the employees to either keep your business alive or to go back, you can get back to where you were, or if you need your employees to help you build a new secondary business or shift your business to a new area, new marketing, new websites, new delivery routes, then hire them for that. But if you don't need them, they have to stay out because you need if the business isn't there, you're not going to help any of your employees. The next bullet, expand your financial capacity. That's in multiple areas. Number 1, you should talk to your landlord and reduce your output. Landlords do not want empty spaces. So talk to them seriously about what you can do to reduce your lease payments. Talk to your bank about expanding your line of credit or reducing your loan repayment schedule so that you have more flexibility. So if there's another dip or a secondary dip, you have some cushion where you can get through that one. Okay, and the final one is that identify clearly your variable costs from your fixed costs. Variable costs, the more you sell, the more it costs you. Your fixed costs, though, if you drop, your fixed costs can strangle you. So look for ways. Right now, you should be looking at your fixed costs. How can I cut my fixed costs, 20%, 30%, or 50%? Is it even possible? And kind of think through that. So if your market doesn't respond properly, you'll be able to respond properly, even though you don't see it coming, but you'll be ready for it. So that's the framework, I think, that we want to invest this PPP money. And I think that's, again, foresight is and our job is to kind of create the strategic framework for companies to be successful going forward, in spite of all these kind of challenges, and to look at all the factors and then help you get these numbers so then your business instincts plus our numbers together actually make good decisions. That applies to everyone. And get your good numbers, get your good business instincts, and we can get through this thing. Okay, that's my optimistic speech for the moment. We'd also like to ask you to take a moment. We're going to run a poll. We'd like to see the relationship between the PPP and company size here. So we're going to run a poll to see how this is impacting companies and how they're taking advantage of it. So if you take a second, just click on a couple buttons there. We'll flash this up on the screen so you can see. We have, I think, almost a couple hundred people on here. You can kind of see overall how the PPP is being treated in the marketplace a little bit. This is just kind of an interest question.
Yeah, let's see if we can get up to 80% participation. It's a good way. All this is anonymous, and it's a good way for us to know who's in the room to guide the conversation to really address your needs. And actually, we're available post webinar to talk through your specifics. Yeah. We've got 68% coming in, 70. Let's get to 80 plus.
Good response.
Yeah.
So Kirk, remind me, we have to fix the spelling mistake. Forgiveness doesn't have an E. Foresight has an E, but forgiveness doesn't. Just saying.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
You always miss those. I can never see them until the day it's on display.
Showtime. Good. 76%. And actually, you can ask questions on the chat box as we progress here. Give another moment. We're at 77, 78%. Kind of see who's in the room here. Very nice. And yeah, there's definitely some folks got some. We've got some 2 million plus funding, and that if you got 2 million plus, according to the SBA, you are going to be audited. So definitely package up a tight package, defendable, that you maintain the FTEs, you maintain the total wages paid out, and it seemed like the criteria may be changing from economic uncertainty, which everybody has, to maybe it's changing, towards a hindsight look at it, economic impact, and that dial is still moving. We got 2 million plus, make it tight. Okay, we're at 79%. I'm gonna turn it off. If a few more can jump in, I'm gonna turn things down here. We're almost at the full amount. Okay, John, I'm gonna wrap it up.
All right.
You can see your results here.
Just pop it up on the screen.
Yeah. There you go. You got a lot of people with $100 to $500,000 of funding, and
And a couple above 2 million.
yeah, less than 100,000 probably won't get out of it. Doesn't mean, make sure you have your records right. Jose will talk about that. Make sure you have it all tied down in the general ledgers.
Interesting.
Very good. I'm gonna turn it off so you guys can jump back into it.
All right. So that's my introduction, and like Jose then is going to pick up, and he's going to help us dig into the details a little bit.
All right, thank you, John. So let's get started. First, I'm going to kind of set the stage and do a little bit of, let's say, reminding of where we were. It seems like a lifetime ago. It was only about 6 to 8 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. When this whole thing first started, application for PPP funding seemed to be fairly easy, right? The SBA put out a one-pager application, and things seem to be kind of, shouldn't be a problem to do this. The reality was very different, right? There was a lot of confusion about who had funds, who had the ability to lend, not so much borrow, but to lend and so forth. And the whole application process quickly devolved into whatever bank you were with, as to how much information they required, and how much due diligence they were doing on your application before being submitted to the SBA, if in fact they had the funding available, or they had enough cash in their tranche to pass it, to go through it. So at that point in time, there was a lot of confusion. In reality, there continues to be a lot of confusion. But then we really rolled into the forgiveness and what's going to happen there. And this is what obviously the topic for this morning's webinar. But the idea there, what we said at the very beginning of all this, if the application process was easy-ish, the forgiveness is going to need attention, because at that point in time, we weren't quite sure how much bandwidth there was, how much manpower there was to follow up, do the audits, and so forth. And from the very beginning, we said, if you do nothing else, you have to sweat the details. And that was key to everything. What I will say right now, as we roll into kind of the meat of the presentation, is if you learn nothing else from this next 20 minutes or so we're going to spend together, call your banker, email your banker, find out what they expect in the forgiveness application package. Just like the loan application package, where every bank had slightly different needs or wants and asks, I think it's going to be once again, it's going to depend on the bank. So go to your bank, find out what it is they're looking for, what they're going to need as we roll into the forgiveness application time frame and process. So let's move on to the next one. Kirk, please. So this slide is just a quick reminder. There's really two programs out there which folks can and have taken advantage of. One is the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, which we're going to focus on today, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And the other one is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL. Although both loans are run by the SBA, the PPP is being administered by banks and the lender you work with, whereas the EIDL is being administered directly through the SBA. Some big differences between the two, obviously, or not obviously perhaps, but the big differences between the two is the rate. For example, the PPP is at a 1% fixed, the EIDL is at 3.75. The terms of the PPP, if it's not forgiven, it's a 2-year term loan, whereas the EIDL can be up to a 30-year term loan. The reason we're talking here today is because there's the opportunity for forgiveness, up to 100% forgiveness with approval on the PPP, but the EIDL is not eligible for forgiveness. So they're two different programs, and I am confident that a lot of folks on this webinar have taken advantage of the two of them. But they're different tools and slightly different vehicles. Kurt, next, please. So overview and recap. So going back to the very beginning of all this, on March 27th, Congress approved the CARES Act, and it provided for almost $350 billion to help small businesses keep workers employed, and also cover other expenses, which we'll touch on in a few minutes. But at the very beginning, the spirit of this law was really as a pass-through, and this was actually language which John came up with, and I have incorporated. I've never given him credit for into all of my conversations with clients and webinars like this. But it really was an idea to get that cash through to your employees so they could continue to put food on the table and so forth. A lot of folks at the beginning of this saw this as cheap capital or free capital. It really wasn't intended that way, although potentially that's what it turns out to be, especially if it just ends up on your balance sheet under full forgiveness, or even as a 1% loan. It is inexpensive capital you've got on your books now. Real quickly, we all know this. The first tranche was very quickly exhausted within a couple of weeks. So that spurred Congress to a week later on April 24th to go out and approve another $310 billion of PPP loans. So total funding that's out there right now, according to my calculator, about $659 billion. And I know there's talk of, in fact, just earlier today, the Chiron on the TV was showing that the Fed is back in trying to put together another program for small and medium-sized businesses to try to, plug the holes and help out the people that didn't get it and didn't really quite get through the process in the original PPP program in both tranches. So next slide, please, Kirk.
Here you go.
Thank you. So what's the application for loan forgiveness going to look like? Since we last gave this particular webinar, which I believe was last Tuesday or Thursday, it all blends for me nowadays. But over the weekend, the SBA did in fact publish an a forgiveness application on their website. That application is very much in line with what the forgiveness application is very much in line with what the loan application was in terms of the kind of information they're looking for. Having said all that, as I mentioned, less than 5 minutes ago, reach out to your banker and try to understand what it is they're going to be looking for in that application process, in that application package. Even though the SBA put out that forgiveness application, the banks are the ones that are going to be collecting the information. My guess, once again, this is an opinion, is that it will align very closely with the information they ask from you at the front end of this process, and probably to a certain extent to meet the requirements that the SBA has in the application. So keep that in mind. We will be sending that application around as part of when we send out this slide deck, but you can literally go to the SBA website right now or right after this webinar and download it and take a look at it. It's only about 4 or 5 pages, but there's some details in there and definitions around payroll and things of that nature, which is in line with everything we've seen so far. So there's no big changes there. But nevertheless, take a look at it and then call your bank and find out how their application process is going to align with that. The other thing to keep in mind, something that's changed a little bit. The original wording on the forgiveness process was that you had 8 weeks from the date of origination to ask for forgiveness to apply for forgiveness through your bank. And then the bank would turn around, collect your information, and then send that to the SBA with a recommendation for forgiveness or not. And then the bank literally had 60 days to get back to you to let you know if you got the forgiveness. So to a certain extent, you're going to get this, if you've got this loan, you put in the forgiveness application to your bank, you might not find out for another 60 days if the money's been forgiven or not. So that's something to keep in mind with regards to the timing. What we're finding, once again, in line with what we saw over the weekend in the SBA application, but the request should include, but once again, check with your bank, confirmation of your payroll costs. At the very beginning, this has kind of been a big driver of this entire process. Documentation verifying the number of full-time employees and their pay rates, once again, to confirm that what you apply for aligns with the forgiveness you're asking for. Now, having said that, everybody understands there's been a lot of flux between the period when we were calculating, the period that was used for the calculation of the loan, and the 8 weeks that have been that are in the forgiveness process. So keep that in mind. Another rule that came out was the 75-25 rule. The PPP loan you received, you have to use a minimum of 75% of those proceeds towards payroll. Then then the remaining 25 can be used for things like mortgage, lease, and utility obligations. Keep in mind, utilities is defined as not only water, electricity, and gas, kind of the classics, but also internet services. I saw in the chat box, one of the participants asked that question. So that is definitely something that can be included in the application. But that's, once again, keep in mind, you got to use at least 75% of the proceeds for your for payroll purposes. Then I mentioned the mortgage, interest, rent, things of that nature. And then once again, kind of my big default here is that last bullet point, which additional documentation may be requested by your lender. So keep that in mind. Make a phone call to your banker, send an email, and try to understand what it is they're going to be looking for in the next few weeks as we get into this. Because the other thing to keep in mind, and I've accepted, is that if the loan application process was confusing, I think this forgiveness process is going to be just as confusing. And the scrums we saw at the front end are similar to the scrums we're going to see here at the back end. So kind of get your ducks in order early, sweat the details, as I mentioned up front, and start putting together that package. And keep tracking start tracking all the information that you will likely need for the forgiveness application. So that's my segue into the next slide. And that is, what do we understand so far? But more specifically, how is forgivable payroll cost defined? So gross payroll is salary, wages, and tips. Now, the nuance here, and I think I'm comfortable saying that we're all now aware of this and getting comfortable with it and how we calculate it. But everyone's going to be capped at $100,000. So as you're going through your payroll period, the easiest way to think about it, if you have an employee on the books that makes over $100,000 a year, you can only claim $100,000 of that towards your PPP forgiveness. So the easiest way to think about it is you take $100,000. Let's say you're a company that pays monthly. It's the easiest calculation to make. Or you pay every 24 weeks. What you do is take $100,000 divided by 12, and that's the cap you can use per pay period that can apply to the forgiveness. If you're paying 24 times a year, take that $100,000 and divide it by 24, and that's the cap. So per pay period, make a list of your employees, look at what they make by for that particular pay period, and once again, if you're paying monthly, compare that to $100,000 divided by 12, or if you're paying every 24 weeks, or I'm sorry, 24 times a year, divide that 100,000 divided by 24, and use that as your cap. Sum all of that up, and you're going to get a delta, obviously, between your gross payroll and what's available. Well, I say obviously, and if you have employees over $100,000, not so obvious. And then that'll be the amount of gross payroll that you can apply towards forgiveness. Next question we get a lot is, how are mortgage and lease obligations defined? One of the important ones to keep in mind is that it can only be lease and mortgages that you got into prior to February 15th. So, you know, don't try to game the system. These are things that have been, you already had on the books before the period, before the PPP period kind of, or the COVID crisis really began, is a better way to say it. You can only apply interest payments, not principal payments, to these types of obligations. Keep that in mind. Depending on how your rent is structured, rent is an applicable expense to apply towards forgiveness. Utilities, I mentioned it before because it's been coming up a lot and a lot of questions. It's not just your classic electricity, gas, and water, but also telephone and internet. Include that in your calculations if you don't if you don't use up all of your PPP funds with just payroll, but you can use those. Something that's interesting in the wording of the act is that you can include transportation. What's more interesting is that I've not been able to find a good definition of what that transportation means. So if you're a company that has, let's say, a trucking fleet, and part of your business is that trucking fleet, check with your banker. Understand if that's something that you can use towards, you can apply towards the forgiveness. Once again, a lot of what I've discovered in the last 2 or 3 weeks since we've really been digging into the forgiveness aspect of this is a lot of this is going to come down to what your bank is requesting in that forgiveness application process, and more specifically what they expect to what they're going to need from you to make a recommendation to the SBA towards the forgiveness of your loan. Next, Kirk, please. So one of the most important aspects of all of this is how you're tracking those funds. At the front end of this whole process, the one thing we told all of our clients, but to a certain extent, common sense, but in your accounting system, whether be it NetSuite, be it Great Plains, be it QuickBooks, make very clearly denote the PPP funds when they arrive. And when into your bank account, make sure that that entry is very clearly denoted as PPP funds. And then every application of payroll you apply to it, make sure it shows PPP funds, or anything with regards to a rent or utility payment, make sure it's clearly denoted as PPP funds. And the reason being is at the end of all this, it's going to be much simpler for you to run a report that just shows here's all the money, here's all the funds I used against the PPP funds. So keep that in mind. Make sure, you know, sweat the details, what we keep coming back to. The other one is, once again, obvious, but you'd be surprised some of the questions we get. Make sure you're only using these funds for authorized uses. When you're actually journaling and taking into account these cash outflows, make sure you're putting in there, this is what it's used for. Don't use it for something else and put the note in there. Work with your bank to understand what kind of report they want at the back end, and try to tailor perhaps what what you can pull out of your particular accounting system as a so it's easier for the forgiveness application process. And then the other one several of our clients have done, and some of the accounting firms have definitely been recommending, is having a separate account for the PPP funds. Or if you already have an account on the books on your balance sheet that's rarely used for whatever reason, you know, put the funds into there so you can clearly track what you're using the monies for. And it'll be an easier conversation to have at the back end, an easier way to really focus folks on how the funds came in and then ultimately how the funds went out. Next slide, please. So the other question we get is, what happens if my loan is not completely forgiven? The bad news is you're going to have a loan on your books, which you're going to have to pay back. The good news is it's going to be a low interest loan. The other gray area in this, it's not clear what that loan is going to look like. My assumption, my opinion is a lot of these loans are going to look like bullets or balloon payments, that there's going to be interest only for the life of the loan, and at the end of it, there'll be some kind of a balloon payment that you can refi and so forth. But once again, that's a conversation you want to be having with your banker now. Start thinking about if my funds are not completely forgiven and I'm still going to have this loan on my books, what's it going to look like? What are going to be the terms and conditions associated with it? We know the APR is going to be 1%, but how's it going to be structured? Interest only with a balloon at the back end, It's going to depend on you and your bank. My assumption is a lot of these will become balloon payments, and you'll be able to refi them at the back end of it. But once again, call your bank. That's how you need. I think in fact, I know I started this conversation with that statement, and I'm going to continue to harp on it. It'll probably be the last thing you hear from me today. Next slide, please. So kind of to start wrapping up my portion of this, it's really what have we, some of the interesting things I was doing my research into all of this is, something that blew my mind was the fact that as of April 16th, 1.7 million loans were approved, equated to about $342 billion. The SBA processed 14 years worth of loans in less than 2 weeks. I just found that fascinating. Obviously, there was a lot of confusion on the front end. I know of a lot of folks that weren't able to get funding for different reasons, mostly bureaucratic. But still, the time and effort that went into all of this was fascinating for me to look at. As we already know, the $349 billion that was allotted for the program disappeared in less than 2 weeks. Not disappeared, it was allocated, it was lent out. Disappeared is probably the wrong word. Once again, just the cash flows just boggled my mind as I was going through it. I started looking at where these loans were being given. Texas received the most loans at 134,000 plus. California was number 2 on the list at 113,000 loans. Following 3, 4, and 5 was Illinois, New York, and Florida. Real interesting. A data point which I kind of started to dive into was loans per capita. And what I found interesting about that is obviously per capita is by the number of citizens you have in that particular state. So as I was looking through the numbers, North Dakota per capita received the most PPP loans in the country at $2,037 per capita, per person in the state. Lightly populated state. The flip side of that, California, New York, $845 and $1,041 per capita. Once again, because of, the flip side of that is because they're populous states. Kirk, next slide.
There you go.
Then I love my bell curves. And I was trying to put together a slide that showed kind of where the loans came in. The vast majority of loans were between $350 and $1 million, almost a quarter of them. But not too far behind, on both sides of that bell curve, the 1 to 5 million, and then on the south end of it, 150 to 350K. So once again, fairly well spread out across the country, and then greater than 5 million was only 9%, or rather well spread out across the tranches of the tranches of the amounts. As far as industries that received the loans, the construction sector, the small business construction sector received the most loans at 45.5 billion. About 13%. And then roughly in the same range, professional services manufacturing received a little bit less, in the 13 and 12%. But once again, for roughly $45 billion for each of those sectors. And then finally, arts, entertainment, and recreation only got 1.5% or 5.3 billion. So I just wanted to share some of this information with you, stuff I found interesting. This is the end of my portion. So I'll turn it back to John, and then I think we're going to go into some Q&A and see if we can help clear up some of the confusion. But keep in mind, all of our contact info is on the front end and the back end of this deck, so you can easily reach out to us, and we'll help you any way we can.
Hey Jose, a couple of questions. You mind if I throw them out to you?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one is, are bonuses included?
Yes. Yeah, the answer to that is yes, but I would keep in mind that if you're suddenly throwing out big bonuses just to make the PPP funds, qualify for forgiveness, that might be a red flag. That's the only way I'll say it. But bonuses are included. Bonuses and commission are both included in the calculation of gross payroll.
I think the language is bonuses in the normal course of business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you do a quarterly or semi-annual bonus, you could do that.
I mean, any more discussion about that 8-week period on whether it's going to be extended or not?
That seems to, well, I'll just start. I have not seen anything written that it's going to be extended to 16 weeks or 12 weeks. It seems, I don't know if I don't know if I call it a rumor, or I just haven't seen it. I'd love to hear what the folks on this webinar, or John or Kirk, what you've heard on the street recently. The one thing that is interesting is that you can, originally the 8-week period started on the day of loan origination. If you read the SBA forgiveness application that came out over the weekend, the way I read it, let me quantify that, or at least give that caveat, is that you can move that window, that 8-week window, to match that first payroll in the period, just to optimize, or to match a payroll period, just to optimize the full impact of the forgiveness opportunity. But I have seen nothing officially that says we're expending, or that anything will be extended much beyond the 8 weeks we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's really good. Here's one for you. I mean, this is a gray area in my mind, but I'll be interested to see what, Jose, you and John think about it. I'll read the question. It says, our employees were asked to take a 20% pay cut during April and now most of May. Once we receive the PPP funds, will we return, we will return their salaries to normal, but could they do a retroactive payment for those 20% discounts they took and still have that included as part of the PPP forgiveness?
That's a good one. I had not heard that one, I got to admit. The way I heard it, what I think you just read, Kirk, I don't have the chat box here in front of me right now to see that particular question. My sense is that should be forgivable as long as you get back to where you were originally. I believe what I'm reading into this is that you saw the situation, there was economic uncertainty, your team agreed to take a pay cut to help everyone along. You get the PPP funds, and now you're going to kind of go back and backfill. I believe that would qualify for forgiveness. It's an interesting question, and that's a good one to talk with your banker through and make sure they understand the logic, and more importantly, understand the numbers and how it all played together.
Yeah, that's a good one. Is it retroactive? And what about, are people allowed, from a forgiveness standpoint, can you use 100% of the funds for W-2 payroll?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
If you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. The 75-25 rules, you just have to use a minimum of 75% for payroll.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, you want more questions?
Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
This is from Ed. When does the 8-week time period start?
All right. So once again, the answer to that is the original wording was it starts the day of the loan was originated. Now with the SBA or a forgiveness application, there's a little bit of wiggle there to align that 8-week period with the payroll period, so you can maximize the forgiveness opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. Literally 8 weeks, hopefully to be extended. Here's a question, Jessica. If I can't give bonuses, can I give mental health days during the 8-week window and have them count? I would say you can give vacation days, but something like mental health days, something invented like that might be tough. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I probably tend to agree with you on that one, Kirk. Once again, I had not heard this question either. It's an interesting way to think about it, and everybody needs mental health days.
I think I would say you have to, if you've given them before, that would be important. I would just say work from home. Give them a work from home day and pay them for that. And that way you don't have to make a whole new category.
Yeah, I think John's point about not making a new category is key. So maybe you treat it as vacation days or something like that. That's kind of more readily common, let's say.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, we're at time now, so I'm going to invite folks. There's still quite a few questions here. I'm going to invite folks to reach out to us by email. We're going to send a link to this recording to everyone who attended immediately after, no later than tomorrow by the time we get it posted to the website. So appreciate your attendance. It is, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, some of the rules, especially if you're a government contractor, there's some thought about applying FAR 31, where you actually, for every dollar PPP forgiveness, some parts of the government want to reduce what they pay you. So that's not a rule yet, but that's the kind of discussion going on out there, with the taxation aspect of it. So stay tuned. We're going to, keep working through this and communicating, what we know at each point in time to the folks that we're in touch with. So by all means, reach out to us if you got any more specific questions. Okay. Hey, Jose and John, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You're at the front lines now helping your clients. I appreciate you taking time out to help a broader audience. So thank you so much.
No, hey, thank you. And thank everyone for taking the time to join us here. And kind of like we said at the beginning, we're here to help. So feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help you any way we can and let you know what we know.
Thank you.